Okay, I'm super excited to be here today. But before I begin with this talk, I just I want to say a big thank you to all the organizers. Could we please give the organizers a round of applause? Thank you very much. We do take it for granted, but organizing community conferences are quite difficult. It takes a lot of work, and they've done an amazing job here. I'm really glad I was allowed to give this last talk. I hope I can do some really nice things to make everyone happy. So before I begin, let's make some first introduction questions. How many people actually do open source here? And don't lie to me. Okay, that's quite a few hands. How many people would like to do open source? Yeah, okay, that's more like the response I was hoping. Okay, so hello. In Finland, we will say terve. Don't ask me why I moved to Finland. It's a long story. I'm Kenigbolo Meya Steven. That should look very weird. That's mostly because I don't want people to pronounce my name wrongly. But I can tell you how it's pronounced later on. I'm the front-end engineering team lead at Bcaster in Finland. I used to be a developer advocate. I'm an app convener and community manager for Cocoapods. Cocoapods is a weekend-intensive software engineering bootcamp that we run for underrepresented folks in tech to get more underrepresented folks into tech. You can find me on Twitter at ExpensiveSteven. Don't ask me about that handle because I won't tell you. But an important caveat before you follow me, please take note that I tweet a lot about diversity and inclusion. I talk about having more women in tech, more black people in tech, more LGBTQ in tech. So if you're not comfortable with that, probably do not follow me because I post that kind of shit. Yeah, thank you. I'm also liberal, so if you're conservative, I make a lot of jokes about that, so have that back of your mind. But what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to talk about what open source is, why we should all contribute to open source, and how easily it is to get started with open source. So I know that last point is debatable, but it actually can be. So what on earth is open source? This is the dictionary definition from Oxford Dictionary, denoting software for which the original source code is made freely available and may be redistributed or modified. That's what Oxford says. I'm not really sure how that applies. It's technically accurate. In real life, probably not so much. My next question will be, how many people here can say that all the tools that they've used in their life as software developers were actually written by them? Yeah, if you raise your hand, I was actually going to bring you out here. Okay, so why should you contribute to open source? Working on Freenode. Who knows Freenode? Who's old school here enough to know Freenode? Okay, so there are a few hands. Yeah, that's good. That's good. So I don't feel out of place. That's nice. Freenode, working on Freenode helped me earn many of the skills I later used for my studies in university. And my actual job, I think working on open source projects helps me as much as it helps the projects. This was an interview, and it was given by Arietta. She's a she, by the way. So for those who actually think open source is a all-boys club, nah, that's not how it works. And she said this, why she loves contributing to open source. And I can give my personal story. The first conference I spoke at was an internal conference of a company that's probably 10 times bigger than where I work at today. And how did I get there? I was working at a previous company, and we had an issue we needed to deal with. So I created a small tool. And the reason I created the tool was because I found that a lot of people were also having the same questions on Stack Overflow, and it was a really huge hit in Google. So I made this tool. To be honest, I considered the tool to be bullshit, pardon my swearing, but at that time, it did handle the use cases that we had. So for me, this was important. And someone saw that and then invited me to actually come and talk about how I built that tool, what were my thought processes behind it. And that's how I actually got into public speaking. So there are a lot of benefits that can come with contributing to open source. Let's look at some of these benefits. Improving existing skills. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. Open source can be a pain in the ass. Who has ever submitted code for pull request and got told that this code is actual shit? No one. Oh, one, two, three. Okay, so there are a couple of people. Now, if you've had that and you think it's bad, you should go and look at what we say on pull requests on some open source repositories. You'll be surprised. Now, it's not so straightforward, but you can improve a lot of your skills. And this is because you have a community of people who are actually doing the same thing as you. It doesn't matter if you're super skilled or underskilled. I do not personally believe that there's anything like underskilled when it comes to contributing to open source. Next, you meet people who are interested in similar things. One of my closest female friends at the moment is Jessica Jordan. I talk about her a lot because she's an amazing black woman in tech. And how I met Jessica was when I found out she was contributing to Ember.js products. She's on the learning team of Ember.js. And that's how I met her. We have a lot of similarities. Every time I go to a conference, she's like always next to me. We're not here together at this time, but most of the conferences I've spoken of, we usually go together. An interesting part is we became friends from that, but we now have a kind of bond where myself, her, and Chris, we sit down over calls. We're in different parts of the world. But we brainstorm about talks. We talk about difficulties we might have in the office. We talk about challenges. So you can actually make genuine friends from open source also. Find mentors and teach others. This is also something really interesting. One of my role models in open source is Yehuda. Who knows Yehuda cards? Yep, okay, awesome. I started off in C++ and then moved to Ruby and Ruby on Rails, and he was like an idol. I was glossing through the code he wrote. I'm like, how can someone be so smart? And then, of course, I learned a lot of stuff from him. I eventually got to meet him, again, due to open source. So you can find a lot of mentors, and you can teach people as well. Some of the times we always think that we don't know so much. My knowledge is limited. Trust me, there's someone who doesn't know as much as you do. Contributing to open source and helping someone make their first pull request can actually be you changing someone's engineering career. So that's also something to keep in mind. Build public artifacts that help you grow and build a reputation and career. I think this is also a very important benefit of open source that we don't mention a lot, but I think it's also very important. You can get a lot of visibility from contributing to open source. How many people use Webpack here? Okay. How many of you know Sean Larkin? Okay, a couple of hands. All right. Who doesn't know Dan Abramov? Who doesn't know Dan from React? So you see that there's almost no hands. Okay, there are a couple of hands. 1, 2. That's a good thing. Doing open source can bring a lot of visibility to you. It can also create a situation where people actually know the value you can bring to the organization. And I can say this personally. When I was employed as an engineering lead at Bcaster, I never did a technical interview. The CTO went on GitHub, found a couple of projects I had worked on, and basically said he wanted me on the team. I never did a technical interview there. So it can actually help you create a public profile also. And basically, it stands like some kind of reputation track for you as well. And lastly, learn people's skills. How many people here wear headphones when they need to write code? Come on, don't lie. Okay, a few hands. Okay, more hands. All right. You can learn vital people skills when you contribute to open source. And why do I say this? It's because in the open source community, we have different kind of characters. Most recently, I'm pretty sure a lot of people must have heard about the issues we had in the React community. It's something I don't like to touch on, but it showed that we do have a lot of different characters. What I took from that episode was that it's important to have people skills. It's important to know how to address issues. This is something you can actually get from open source. You see, I can tell you that when you keep on hearing like, oh, that code is shit, you automatically you generate some really strong shield, and you know how to take constructive criticism. You know how to actually address BS in that sense. So you can have vital people skills by contributing to open source. So how to get started? Trust me, it's not as complicated as you think. Who would like to get their first pull request approved today? Really, no one wants to contribute to open source, really. Okay, few hands, few hands, few hands. All right. Who thinks contributing to open source is difficult? Be honest. If you think contributing to open source is difficult. Okay, that's a lot of hands. And I'm going to bust your bubble and tell you that it's not as difficult as you think. It's way more difficult than you think. No, I'm just kidding. In principle, it can be challenging, but generally what you need is a right entry. How many people are responsible for documentation? If you document your code, and don't lie to yourself, come on, like no one is going to blame you, but if you document your code, just signify, let me see. Okay, if you think the state of documentation for a lot of frameworks are absolute bullshit, let me see your hands. Okay, so that's quite a lot of hands. And that shows that there's a lot of things you can actually do to help in open source. There's a misconception that says, oh, you need to know how to code to actually contribute to open source. That's actually a lie. There are a lot of people who are not really experienced coders who do an awesome job on open source. There are a lot of people who are experienced coders, and their primary job on open source tools are not actually about coding. And I'm going to show you one. So I'm quoting author, and when he says, I've been renowned for my work on Cocoapods. Who knows Cocoapods? Few hands. Okay, if you were around the iOS field, this is something very common there for them. Most people don't know that I actually don't do any real work on the Cocopod tools itself. My time on the project is mostly spent doing things like documentation and working on branding. This is Ota, and you might know him now from Microsoft. I believe he's on the TypeScript team at the moment. But he became popular for Cocoapods. And here he's saying that it wasn't actual code. What he did the most was documentation and branding. Very similar to what Sean Larkin does for Webpack. Of course, he also does code, but he does a lot of things in documentation and branding and showing that. So there are a lot of things you could actually do in open source. There are a lot of amazing women who contribute to open source. There's Natalia on Vue. There's Sarah Drasana. There are a lot of amazing people who also contribute to open source. And it's on both sides of the spectrum. So if you're a lady and you feel like open source is a boys' club, I'm sorry to bust your bubble, but it's not. At least it's no longer a boys' club. There are a lot of amazing women being kick-ass and doing a lot of amazing things there. And yeah, I like to tell people about my proudest moment contributing to open source. You might be surprised, it has nothing to do with code. I didn't write a line of code at all. My proudest moment was when I landed in Node.js. This was the 11.4.0 release, and my name was there. It's nothing big, but for every code I've written for open source repositories, or every contribution I've made to AWS Exchange, where I volunteer as an open source engineer, this was my proudest moment. Why? It was a pain I was feeling, and I fixed it for others not to feel. I'll show you. Yeah, that was my mood. So what landed me there was this, the authority and scheme pseudo headers. How many people actually know that on the request object you actually have these pseudo headers, authority and scheme? Yeah, okay, 2 hands. That basically shows you how much problem this was if you needed to use it. It wasn't documented anywhere. Now we're talking about Node.js 11.4. We have gone from 0 point and we're 11.4 and we don't have this. So if you think that, oh, some projects are too advanced and there's nothing you can do about it, trust me, there are a lot of things you can do about it. And this was one. I say this because I want you to know that you don't have to be an expert or anything. You can actually contribute to open source. Yeah, I saw a lot of faces like that. This was a bit tricky. I was like, if I do that, would I have that? Wow, and I did see those faces, so quite appropriate. And this is another one. This is on Prisma. If you're in the GraphQL, if you use GraphQL, you'll probably have seen this or have come around Prisma. And this also didn't involve code. This was me facing a challenge, discovering it wasn't documented, and actually going on to help make sure it was there for others who would eventually meet it. So in general, the message I'm trying to give you today is, don't fret. open source can be challenging, open source can be daunting, but it doesn't have to be as complicated as we make it. The fact that you see someone who's super skilled and he contributes to open source does not mean you cannot do it. Everyone can actually contribute to open source. Yep, I think that's my wife. Definitely my wife. Okay, if you're willing to get in one contribution, or even better if it's your first, before this conference ends, feel free to meet me. A lot of the speakers here also are into open source, or they actually can direct you how to get started. So I would really like that we take our time to contribute to open source. Another important thing I wanted to mention here is we should also try to encourage people who maintain open source packages. Now, one thing I encourage is contributing to open source, like I said, doesn't always have to be code. You could easily buy someone a coffee every month. A cup of coffee maybe is $5. That actually helps someone who's maintaining a package. So this is something that you can also do. This could be a way for you to contribute. But then again, that's totally up to you. So if you want to get your first contribution, I have a ton of issues around both in React, in Vue.js, Ember.js. There's a lot of stuff there. You can definitely get started. And you can find all this information over there, opensource.guide, how to contribute. There's a lot of information you can also get from that point. And if you feel challenged or you feel like you want to do it, but there are certain blockers, please feel free to send me DMs. I'm always open and willing to listen and help as much as I can. So feel free to hit me out. I'm not even the greatest open source contributor. My open source contribution is mostly to AWS Exchange. But please hit me up and I can try to help you out with whatever contribution you want to do. And if you're interested in Ember.js, I recommend Ember.js as for beginners, generally, because the community there is very helpful to getting people contributing to open source. They guide you and give you practical tips that helps you in such a way that you can take it to any other community and start contributing. So this is actually one I do recommend also. But yeah, that's all for today, and thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be here. Thank you.